Hello, this is Tales of Dread. Tonight, we talk about sea monsters, so have fun and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. When I was a little boy, I liked to watch my dad fish. I guess it was inevitable that when I got older, I would do what my father did, and that's what I did. I guess I was a fisherman for 40 years. Years went by quickly, and I didn't stop to think about the past until I was 87. Now that I'm 87, I think it's time to talk about something that happened to me when I was 19. In the summer of 1952, two of my co-workers and I were fishing off the coast of Cornwall on our boat. We were looking for red salmon because a local butcher would pay us a lot of money if we gave him fish. We were on a boat on a hot summer day and had a few beers. We took off our t-shirts and waved to a group of young women who were having a picnic on the beach. Even though we didn't know the girls, they called us to come to their picnic. At the time, I was 19 years old and had been working as an apprentice fisherman for about 5 years. It was very rare for me to meet someone of the opposite sex. The women kept talking and waving at us. Their vanilla perfume seemed to fill up our boat with its smell. Its soft feminine sounds were almost technomic, and they made me feel like a young girl again. I remember it as if it happened just yesterday. As I write this for a wise old man, I can't help but laugh. Someone once said, "Let the devil take the woman, and that's what happens when you follow your young desires." Well, you know that what happened that day was pure madness and terror. And mesmerism, the other people on the boat decided to jump off and swim to the beach so they could walk up to the girls. I told them it seemed like a good idea and urged them to go. As soon as they jumped, the sky turned very grey and it started to rain hard. I watched as they struggled against a wave that was getting more and more wild. I took a quick look up with the girls. I could see them jumping up and running away, probably because they were afraid of the rain or didn't want to meet the guys. I started to wonder if it was a trick or if it was too good to be true. The rain keeps coming down, and I could see that my friends were having a hard time. Then I saw something horrible that makes my hand tremble with fear. From the depths of the ocean, what looked like a big snake came out. It was more than 15 feet long and had a big green slimy body, just like a sea snake. It looked like it had things that were a foot long, and its head was about the same size as a human head. It was a scary thing to see, and just remembering it scares me. The guys in the water saw the snake, and I saw that it looked like it was after them. My friend was getting poked, and then I saw signs of blood. I grabbed something nearby and threw it in the direction the snake was now flailing around, jumping in and out of the water like a dolphin, but with clear intent to hurt the creature. The snake turned around, saw me, and ran through the water towards me. It has a huge tail. It shot up and tried to hit me in the face, but I used an oar on the boat to block it. It seemed like it was intent on striking at me. It hits hard and wants to eat human flesh. It seemed like I was so scared I couldn't believe it. I had never seen anything like it before, and at 19 years old I was still a sea virgin. Even my father had never heard of or seen anything like this before. I tried to fight the beast, but I felt like I was going to lose. The creature that looked like a snake got on the boat and was now facing me straight on. The boat tipped over a little and seawater poured onto my feet, which are now wet. I knew I was going to die, but I also knew I wouldn't just give up. I kept kicking at the beast furiously, hoping that if I hit it, it would run away in fear. But this beast looked just as dangerous as it did hungry, and I finally got a small piece of oar to hit it. But the boat was now almost all at once underwater. Suddenly, the storm stopped in the sky, and this creature that looked like a snake went back down into the water. Things didn't change much, so I thought it was safe to swim back. And as I did, I couldn't find my friends anywhere. When I found them later, they had deep cuts and wounds from where this thing had attacked them, and they were almost out of blood. When we told other people what happened, they didn't believe us. But maybe some biologists thought it might have been a strange underwater creature that science hadn't yet found. Whatever it was, it scared me, and I was glad I never saw it again in all the years I went fishing. Look, I know it sounds crazy, but this story happened to me a lot when I was younger, and I haven't had anything like it since. I know that there are crazy sea stories out there, but this is mine. Just keep in mind that almost every fisherman has their own. Hi, what's down there? Let me introduce myself. I'll call myself David. I teach first grade in Northern Ireland, and I am a teacher. I found your channel because I recently went through something upsetting that has been messing with my mind. I've been out of work for a year now, and I don't think I can go back right now. This isn't just because of COVID, but also because of what I saw and heard during the summer of 2018. The teachers take the students in Primary 7, who are all about 11 years old, to a beach resort. It's always a fun and memorable weekend to say goodbye to them before they move on to high school. The weekend is always full of different things to do and fun things to do. Both the kids and the teachers love it. I've loved going on the trip every year for the past 10 years, but that was before 2018. I was in charge of a group of about 5 kids, and it was my job to take them on a short canoe trip. This was just off the coast of Cork, and to say it was beautiful would be putting it mildly. I remember thinking how lucky I was to be Irish, and how lucky I was to have a job that let me visit such beautiful places and get paid for it. We all went out in our canoes, and we all wore life jackets. We also had whistles with us in case we got into trouble. Most of the kids already knew how to canoe, so I was good at it. But one kid had autism and had trouble using his oar because he didn't have good hand-eye coordination. He was pretty smart, so he wasn't a complete vegetable. I had to help him and take a little more time to show him how to do it, but he got the hang of it in the end. He was just a little slower than the rest of us, but we all slowed down for him. We were sailing to a place with a very small strain, where we planned to stop for a snack. I put some juice, cookies, and fruit in my backpack, so that all of the kids would be happy and ready to sail back. Some of the kids said it was hard to row because the water currents were getting a little rough. It was a little scary, but I could see that we weren't too far away from land. Dennis, the other kid who was having trouble, was really starting to have trouble. His oar fell into the water and started to sink, and he was starting to feel scared. I told the other people to almost row to shore. I tied a rope to the bow of Dennis's boat and pulled him along. When I got close to him, I saw something big and green that looked like a spider web almost under the water. As I tied the bow of my boat to Dennis's boat, I looked down and thought it was some weird kind of seaweed or something. This thing went around and around. It also seemed to move, growing and shrinking. I just hoped it wasn't a jellyfish or some other dangerous sea creature. When the water went completely still, I turned around to check on the other kids and make sure they were safe on land. As I blinked, a big snake-like thing came out of the water and bit my forehead. It had a big sharp fang that was now covered in my blood. I was freaking out like hell and yelled for Dennis to get in my boat, but he was freaking out even more because this thing kept coming out of the water like lightning bolts and shooting at my head to bite me. It was the most scary thing I've ever done. I was being attacked on the water while I was with a very vulnerable child, and I've never seen a sea creature be so aggressive. I had also been bitten, and my forehead is already getting bigger. No doubt because of whatever venom was released when it bit me. This snake, whatever it was, wasn't very big, probably about the size of a normal rattler, but it was big enough to be aggressive and mean. And from what I understand, I didn't know how poisonous it could have been. Sea snakes have very poisonous bites. I swore and puffed. I finally got Dennis's bow on my boat, and then I started sailing like hell. This thing took off again. Its eyes are like slits, yellow and comforting. But when it talks, I can tell it is angry and wants to kill me. I tried as hard as I could to avoid it, but I couldn't. When it hit, the canoe boat shook and almost tipped over. When we finally got to the shore, the beast seemed to stop trying to get us, and it left us alone. Small but dangerous. Dennis was drenched in cold sweat as I helped him out of the boat. The other kids ran up to us and gave us big hugs. They had seen everything that scared us. All of the kids' faces were white from shock, and they needed water and food right away. We called an ambulance and told them what happened. I got first aid and had my wound bandaged. Luckily, the venom wasn't deadly, but I have to say that the poison of that experience is still with me every day. Since then, I feel the fear and stress I felt in that boat as I fought for my life and the life of the little boy who was in my care every moment of every day. I'm sure I'll never get on that boat again, and I don't even want to go near water. The last I heard, the kids had stopped going to school and were learning at home for now. And Dennis had gone into himself completely. We were all scared by what we saw, which was clear. I hope that by telling you about this, You can give me more information and let me know. I know it was a sea serpent, but it wasn't anything crazy like a leviathan or anything. And I've never seen a sea serpent be so mean. I mean, this thing was so determined to make me fall that I almost tipped over our canoe. Anyway, I want to thank everyone for the hard work they do. We really do thank you. The other day, I found something that I couldn't quite explain. I don't know if it was a hybrid fish or something else, but it scared me. The timeshare that my family owns was empty for 2 weeks. My husband worked a lot of hours during the year, so last summer he decided to try out one of these timeshares. The place was nice, but there was something wrong with it. Well, there wasn't anything wrong with the house itself, but something was wrong with the lake next to it. I didn't want to swim in it, but my kids did. The lake was a strange shade of green. I knew the kids would be fine if they took a shower after getting out of the lake. I wasn't going to get in it though. I had just dyed my hair, and I didn't want it to turn green from mold. There are 3 of them. One is 13, one is 9, and the youngest is 3. I didn't want her to get in the lake because her skin is so sensitive. Something so big could hurt her, especially if there weren't any baby steps, like what we had in our pool back home after we moved in and put our things away. I thought it would be fine to let the kids go play by the lake by themselves. I told them I wanted them back in time for dinner, but I didn't know what would happen that night. I filled Jamie's kiddie pool with a little water from the bucket. Since it only went up to her waist, she could go in there by herself. Even though the water wasn't clear, she would be fine for a while. I asked Julian to watch them while I went inside to start dinner. I could keep an eye on them if I needed to from the kitchen window near the sink. After 20 minutes, I went outside to see how Jamie was doing. I was going to take her with me, but she was crying because she didn't want to leave. So I left her there and went back to the kitchen to finish making dinner. I went outside and yelled for the kids to come inside when I was done. One of them was crying when they got out of the water. I ran to her when she called. I saw that she was covered in these orange things. They were orange and about the size of ladybugs. I tried to pull them off her, but it took a lot of strength and work to get one off. On top it was orange, but it had legs or teeth inside. I didn't know what it was, but when I took it off of her, it wasn't just on her. It had seen the stick itself inside her skin, where it was sucking her blood like a leash. I noticed that they were also on my other things. When I got my youngest child out of the pool, I quickly looked for any of those things. One was on her, but it didn't get past her swimsuit. I took it away from her and stepped on it. I brought them in and asked my husband to help. He was yelling and trying to figure out what was going on. I used a knife to carefully clean them out, but he insisted that we go to the emergency room. Even though it didn't look like they were taking a lot of blood and there were red marks all over their bodies, I thought we should move quickly. When I took the kids' clothes off, I looked down and saw that they had shrunk like grapes do when they dry out. I thought we should take some to the doctors so they could figure out what they were. But when I tried to pick them up, I couldn't. Instead, they broke into pieces on the way to urgent care. My oldest son started to feel sick. Almost makes me worry that they took too much blood. When we left, my husband ran into the building with her in his arms and asked the front desk if they could do anything. I held Jamie in my arms as I walked into the house with Julian. Luckily, the doctor saw them right away. When I told the doctor what had happened, he told me that my oldest child would be fine. She only needed water. He said that he thought those things were leeches. I tried to tell him that they weren't what he thought they were, even though I tried so hard. He just told me to stop making things up so he could see his other patients. The only thing he did was give me a prescription for an ointment that would help the kids' skin marks. Even though it took a long time, the ointment helped their skin heal, but it left scars. I told my husband that we should stop being part of the timeshare and leave, so the kids weren't able to go to the lake. I don't know what those things were, but they were not leeches. Be careful when you go to new lakes. I've never heard of these things before, but they like to live in water that is very foggy and green, like that lake. I should have gone with my first instinct from the start. I just had a strange feeling from the start. Last summer, I took a trip to Lake Michigan. We never went on vacations that I liked. My family was one that always wanted to do things together. I've never really fit into that kind of family structure. I'm just an outcast, both in the world and in my family. So the only time I felt like I could really breathe was when I had alone to myself. So when we went to Michigan, I thought it would be the same, and in a way, it was, but I never thought it would turn out the way it did. I turned 14 a week after we got back from vacation, and all I wanted was some space to breathe. And for the first time in my life, I got that when we went. My dad got me my own room in the hotel we were staying at. It was right next door to my parents' room, but it was the first time I felt like I had my own space. I could watch whatever TV I wanted, and I had time to read the book I'd been trying to find time to read for months. Even though it was a small thing, it was important to me to have my own space and privacy. In the room, it was different. They had some flyers with ideas for things to do near the lake. I looked at a few of them, and one about an underwater adventure caught my eye. Something like an aquatic park came to mind. The next morning, I asked my dad if we could go to the place where I'd seen the flyers. He told me I was old enough to go by myself. Where they were going wasn't too far away, so he said yes. They took me to an area by a lake where I could swim. I looked around to see what a place like that would usually have. There were booths with games for kids and other things. I went to the room where they were and was amazed by what I saw. It was a big area with a big window that looked out onto a part of the lake that had been split off for the park. It was a wonderful sight. We watched as someone dropped a lot of some kind of fish food into the water from above the huge area. What I found interesting, though, was that there was a fish swimming toward the bottom of the lake that didn't care about the feeding party at the top. The fish was black and it moved slowly. I didn't know if it had already eaten or not. But when I got close to the window, I could tell it wasn't a fish at all. It looked like it might have been a fake fish. It was getting closer to the bottom, and something was getting closer to it. Someone or something caught it and started biting it. Even though it looks like a man, he was biting into it. I didn't know what was going on at all. It saw that I was still looking at it, swam over to the corner where I was, and sat down. It was nothing like a man. It looked like some kind of humanoid that lived in water. I don't know if what I was looking at was real or not, but it seemed to be looking right back at me. It almost looked like a face. But if it was alien, it had the shape of a human, but it kind of looked like a creature that could live on land and in water. Its eyes were black all the way through. I'm not sure if someone was trying to mess with me. So I left the room to talk to someone who worked there. I asked him about the fish man in the viewing room, but he didn't know what I was talking about. I tried to find someone else, but no one was around. So I went back to this room where I could watch. Keep in mind that this is a very small room with only one person in it at the time. I looked again and found it swimming behind some fish. It grabbed one of the fish with its webbed hands and ate it. I could tell it had very sharp teeth because it ripped that fish apart so quickly. I thought it was really cool. Someone else must have seen the thing I was talking about too. 2 and 1 of the feeders above the viewing room were looking for it. They looked for it with a long pole in the water. It had a camera that looked down into the water. The fishman saw what it was doing and swam away. He swam to the other side of the split and squeezed through the hole in the net that small fish still used to get in and out. I don't know what I saw, or if anyone else has seen anything like it, but it looked like it had been there for a long time. It could still be out there, and no one would know if it knew to hide from the camera. So it must have always been there. I think it was going into and out of the park. When my parents picked me up, I told them about it. They laughed at me for making up silly things from the books I'd read. They didn't believe me, but I know at least one other person had to have seen what I'd seen. Could just believe me. It couldn't have just been me. I'm sure you've heard of scary big and scary fish that fishermen have caught at sea. Like a lot of the detail. Well, I also have an interesting story about a very big fish I'll call unknown that I saw many years ago when I was cage diving with great white sharks off the coast of Mexico, and it was around 2002. I won't tell you who I was with on the boat, how I got dressed, or how I got into the cage, because that's pretty boring. But anyway, diving with great white sharks is really cool, and if you ever get the chance to do it, it's a lot of fun. I loved it, and was having the best time of my life. Even though I'm not much of an adrenaline junkie or thrill seeker, I had to do this at least once to cross it off my bucket list. So here is where things start to get crazy. So I'm in the cage, and these big beautiful fish are swimming all around me. Knowing I'm only 20 feet away from a man-eating predator, or at least what Hollywood makes them out to be, About 3 of them were swimming around me, and that's when I noticed that they suddenly stopped wanting to swim around me, if that makes sense. They sort of start to move away from each other and out into the open sea. And as I sit there confused, I start to wonder why they aren't swimming around me anymore. I started to notice that deep below me, a very, very big shape was getting closer to the surface. At first, I thought this might be a whale, but the shape, whatever it was, never got close enough to the surface for me to see clear details. All I could really say was that it looked like a very, very large, dark shadow that was moving. Maybe it was some kind of craft. It was hard to say how long it looked, like if you took a sperm whale and made it bigger. I'm not good at describing things either, but the best way I can describe it is that it was a large marine animal, fish, or something else that was much, much bigger than any great white I've ever seen. But again, I can't tell you much because it never got close enough to the surface, even in the water, for me to see what it was. When I think back on what happened, I can only think that the great white sharks ran away when they saw this thing coming toward us. Now, tell me what's under all that stuff in the ocean that makes great white sharks run away just because a fish is there. So that's a mystery for another day, and I'm not kidding when I say the shape of this thing was huge. It took over the whole bottom of my cage, and was again just a black mass. I couldn't tell what it was, but it seemed to move in front of me, below me, and behind me for maybe a minute or two before going back down into the depths where I couldn't see it anymore. After that, the sharks didn't come back, and when I got back to the boat, I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I only said that it seemed like the sharks had lost interest, and that was it. It didn't really scare me, but it did make me think about all the strange things in the ocean. I feel like an idiot for saying this, but I think I saw something that didn't belong, whatever that means. Last summer, I was at my grandfather's lake house in a wooded area of Louisiana. While I was there, I saw a creature, or I guess it was a lake creature. I know that sounds like a crazy plot for a Hollywood movie, but I promise you that the truth is even crazier than fiction. I couldn't figure out what it was or say what it was, so I hope someone can help me figure out what it could be. After doing some research, I found that you have a series about animals that live in lakes and the ocean. This could be the answer to my problem. Every summer, my dad and I go fishing on the lake a few times with our fishing poles. The trip was the same as any other. This time, we got our gear together, did our usual cola pop chug, and rowed out into the lake. Usually, I will keep rolling until I have enough data and we've found the right spot. I put my bait on the hook and drop it quickly into the water. Dad got a bite pretty quickly. He took out a 3 trout, which is why he caught it so quickly. See, young fish aren't smart enough to avoid your bait yet, and they don't even know what it is. So it is easier to catch them. We don't bring our phones with us when we go out on the boat, so I can never tell what time it is. Aside from looking at the sun, I'd say he finally bit about 45 minutes after he caught his eye. It was no doubt a fighter. After I'd pulled and let it in for a long time, I was about to pull it out of the water when a bigger fish grabbed it, hook and all. I rehooked my line and threw it back into the water. I don't know what it was, but bigger fish always like to take my smaller bites. Luckily, I got another bite a little while later, and I was determined not to let this one get away. I let it go for a while before I really started to read it in. I waited long enough for it to look like the fish was caught off guard. I quickly caught it, and as I was taking it out of the water, I saw another fish trying to grab it away from me. Even though I pulled it out quickly, their fish still jumped out of the water to bite it. As I pulled it away, it wasn't much bigger than the 11 fish I caught, but it was a predator for sure. It went back into the water, and for some strange reason it looked at me for a minute before swimming back under. It was a light blue fish with strange eyes that were yellow and brown. It didn't look like it had scales, but almost looked like it had skin. Having second thoughts, I'm not sure it was even a fish. It looked like a fish's head, but it wasn't like any fish I had ever seen. I told my dad I had to go to the bathroom, and I thought that was the end of my day. I kept quiet about what I had seen, but I think the lake and the heat were messing with my mind. It was pretty hot outside, and I think all I needed to do to get rid of the bad headache I was having was to lie down. The next day, we went out again. I picked a different spot on the lake in case what I saw there yesterday was still there. We both had to wait a while before our lines were pulled in, and whatever happened to the fish must have happened overnight. I told my dad that we must have caught all the fish yesterday and that the lake must be closed for the summer. He laughed at me and said we should go somewhere else because it was bad luck to stay in the same place for 2 hours and not find anything. So I rode my horse over to a place near the lake's edge on the other side of the lake, where the woods were. There wasn't much going on until my dad got a fish. I have no idea what he caught, but it was a big one. He was about to lose his grip on the pole when I grabbed it, and a fish jumped out of the water. It had to be a 16 fish, but that wasn't what surprised me. What surprised me was how big something like that was. What did it was the huge hole that was cut in its side. We had to fight something that was already eating it, so it was very heavy. I looked around in the water and saw 2 yellow-brown eyes that were just barely glowing. Then I realized that it was the same thing that had happened the day before. After pulling that thing out, my dad was a little scared, so he decided to call it. We rowed back to shore. We had to go to the store to buy food for dinner because we hadn't caught any fish that day, except for that half-eaten one we pulled out of the lake. Dad said that fishing wasn't as interesting to him this year. I told them that if things didn't get better the next day, I wouldn't mind going home early. The next morning, I got up early and went to the lake to sit on the dock. As the sun came up, I watched the water. From where I was, I couldn't see any fish in the water. Usually, you can come out here and watch the whole lake move like an orchestra of watercolors. But not today. The lake was still and it looked like all the fish had left. I looked over to where we had been yesterday and saw a fawn come out of the woods and head toward the water. As I stumbled across the ground, I watched as it put its head in the water to drink. It was so quiet until something long and white came out of the water, bit the animal on the neck and pulled it in. I jumped up and looked around frantically to see if it had gotten out, but after 10 minutes I could guess what had happened. I just let out a sigh and went inside. Dad was having a cup of coffee when I walked into the kitchen. I told him about the lake and how there were no fish in it. I said that the fish had probably already moved on, so it wouldn't help to stay another day and try to catch them. I didn't tell him what happened to the fawn, though. He was sad, but he knew I was right. We packed up all of our stuff and put it on our truck. At that very moment, I turned to look back at the lake for the last time, and I swore I could still see its eyes staring at me from under the water, just like in a nightmare. Then, something much scarier happened at that very moment. I heard what sounded like something heavy moving around under the dock, and then the dead fawn's body, or should I say half-eaten body, came floating out from under the docks into view. There wasn't much left of it except a big pile of eaten flesh and 1 or 2 legs, which is the only real way to tell if it was still a fawn or not. At one point it was safe to say that my dad and I no longer went fishing out there. When I was very young, my parents died in a car accident. I was probably just about a year old. I was a part of it, but luckily I didn't get hurt. I don't remember it, and I don't remember my parents either. I've only seen pictures of them, and it might sound bad, but none of them really reminded me of them or made me feel like they were my family. So I did feel bad for them because their lives were cut short so quickly and violently, but they were just strangers to me, and I didn't miss them much. Still, I sometimes thought about what my life would have been like if they had made it. Because things would have been very different after the accident, my grandfather took care of me and raised me in a different way than most people. He was divorced and no longer in touch with my grandmother. He also didn't have any other siblings. So for most of my life, it was just me, him, and whoever else happened to be there at the time. But that wasn't what was strange. My grandfather had been out of the Navy for a long time, but he still loved the water. Most of my childhood was spent in hotels and on boats, and I went down all kinds of waterways in the United States and Canada. Even though my grandpa was supposed to be retired, he worked all kinds of jobs at ports just to keep making money and probably to keep his mind. He was a busy man who didn't like to stay in one place for too long. Because of this, nobody stayed with us for a long time. When I was 12, we were down in Oklahoma. It was the start of July, and even though I was used to all kinds of weather by then, the heat and humidity that hit us were almost too much to handle. At first, I tried to sleep in a motel bed, but I was so used to sleeping on boats by that point that I couldn't fall asleep unless I could feel the floor rocking back and forth with the water. It was the opposite of seasickness. It was still and not moving. My grandfather got tired of me tossing and turning, so he let me go back to the docks and sleep in the boat by myself. He thought I was old enough to be left alone. At this point, it was still too hot and humid to be comfortable, but the boat's rocking helped me fall asleep. I was a grown-up baby who still needed his rocking chair, but after a while, I woke up to the sound of something moving in the water nearby. I thought it had to be a fish, but the sounds were too loud and heavy for that to be the case. I went outside and went to the side of the boat where most of the noise was coming from. I looked over the railing, and in the dim light from the moon, I could see the shape of what looked like a huge octopus sitting next to the boat. Its head even seemed to be sticking out of the water. You can guess how confused I was right then. Even if I hadn't grown up around lakes and oceans, every kid would know that octopi don't live in fresh water. There was no reason for me to see one in the middle of the United States. As soon as I leaned in to get a better look, it swam away in the blink of an eye, rocking the boat a bit more with its speed. I wanted to go tell my grandfather about what I had found, but I didn't want to wake him up. I waited until he got back and picked me up the following morning. We went to a small restaurant to eat, and before he could say anything, I told him what I had seen. People at the next table joined in, and an older man was the first to speak up. He said that the octopus, or maybe an entire species, was a problem in all of the state's lakes and rivers. He thought it was the reason why his black lab drowned several years ago. My grandfather wasn't sure, and before I knew it, there was a full-blown argument going on in the restaurant. People in this town didn't seem to agree on whether or not this thing was real. I assume it was another Bigfoot. Some people have faith while others don't. Even though I was sure of what I saw, my grandfather said it was just a dream. He said that he had seen too many strange things out on the water to believe them. Something as silly as a huge freshwater octopus in the middle of the United States. Most of the time, it was just friendly chatter and people making bets. But it did get loud enough that the owner asked us to quiet down, since it was July 4th in the morning. When we got back, the whole town was busy selling things like fireworks, food decorations, and jewelry. We spent the rest of the morning looking around the shops and markets, and I didn't bother trying to catch the octopus again. As soon as it was afternoon, we headed back toward the lake, where people were swimming and boating. Radios were playing and people were laughing. Nobody had even noticed the little boy struggling to keep his head above the water, but I did. I yelled that he was in danger of drowning and needed help. My grandfather jumped in and swam after him, and when he got to him, I screamed as they both went under. Now, more people around me saw what was happening and ran over to help. A few seconds later, my grandfather and the boy came back into sight. When they finally stopped panting, the boys started to cry. A man took the boy from my grandfather's arms and put him on a boat. My grandfather got on the boat with him because he was probably too tired to swim back to shore. I tried my best to see what was going on, but all I could hear was the boy crying about how someone or something kept trying to pull him under. At first, a lot of people looked for another child who might have been drowning and grabbed the boy to save themselves. But when no one could be found to blame, the search turned into a witch hunt. They thought that one of their kids was trying to scare the boy as a joke, but went too far. My grandfather was already on land, but he didn't seem to want to talk. In fact, he seemed to have nothing to do with the present. I don't know what to say or do, so I just watched a few games of beanbags until the sun went down. Then I made s'mores with the other kids while the adults set up the fireworks, telling the people who were mad about the person who tried to drown. By this time, almost all of the boys were drunk, and the memory seemed to have been pushed to the back of their minds. Even though it was time to light the fireworks when night fell, I could tell that something was still bothering my grandfather. After the show, my grandfather and I sat back in our boat and watched. He decided to speak up at last. He said that when he saved the boy, the force that pulled him under the water was so strong that he knew it couldn't have been a person. He also said that he kicked the bad guy so that he would let go of the boy. When it got on the boat, its body felt slimy and soft, almost like jelly. After saving the boy, he said he saw suction cups wrapped around the boy's ankle, but he didn't say anything, since he was too shocked. My grandfather could be very stubborn, but he usually knew when he was wrong and when to admit it. He said he had changed his mind after hearing my story. I was a little scared to sleep on the boat that night, but he decided to stay with me to make me feel better. I swore I could still hear the swishing and feel the occasional hard waves hitting the boat. but I didn't dare move or say anything. As I wanted to make it seem like no one was there, the night went smoothly, and by morning we were back at the restaurant eating. People were again interested in what had happened the day before when someone almost drowned, so my grandfather spoke up. Some people were still doubtful, but most people seemed to believe him. I guess my grandfather just knew how to say things. Those who were doubtful, on the other hand, did not act as friendly as they did the day before. They said that a kid almost died, and just because my grandfather saved him doesn't mean it's okay for him to make up fairy tales about it, or try to make it sound more romantic. My grandfather said he would never do something like that, and soon there was a fight between those who believed him and those who didn't. The restaurant owners finally kicked us out because we were making too much noise, and as we were leaving, some people told us we had overstayed our welcome and needed to leave, while others threw food at us. Even my grandfather and I knew it was useless to keep trying to get them to believe us. So we got back on the boat and left a few minutes later. We never went back. For the next 11 years, until he died of a stroke, my grandfather and I continued to sail together. There are lots of interesting stories from that decade, but none of them are even close to as strange as the one I just told you. I gave up my life as a sailor because it just wasn't the same without him, and it took me a while to get used to living on land, especially in only one place. But I managed to make it work like my granddad. I still like being by the water and wanted to go back, but I think I'll be disappointed if I do it anyway, no matter how much I want to. I'm still curious about that creature, and it makes me itch. I wanted to see if it was still there, and I didn't think anyone would recognize me if I went back to that lake. Since I've been an adult for a while now, another part of me knows I should probably just leave it alone, because if I found it again, I wouldn't be able to sleep that night without my grandfather by my side. Even though this isn't exactly a sea monster, it should be a warning to people who want to swim in lakes in the south during that summer that there are more dangerous things in the water that want to hurt you. We spent a lot of time with my family going all over Texas, to different lakes, parks, and doing all kinds of outdoor activities. We were only there for those 2 months. We must have gone to at least 17 different lakes. So I don't remember exactly where this one was. I want to say it was outside of Houston, but I could be wrong. Maybe it was closer to Dallas. Well, when I was 13, I thought it would be a good idea to go paddleboarding all the way to the middle of the lake on this day. Keep in mind that this is a pretty big lake. I don't know how big it was in terms of feet or anything else, but it wasn't very big. I mean, it wasn't like it was a mile across or anything, but you could see the other side of the lake, though it did take a little bit to get out. So, when I was 13, I put on my life jacket because I wasn't the best swimmer. So, when I think back, I'm surprised by how brave and determined I was, but I didn't let anything stop me from reaching my goal. So, like I said, I put on my life jacket, got on the paddleboard, and got my paddle. Then I set out to see how far I could get across the lake, at least in my mind at the time. I think I just wanted to be able to reach the middle, where I thought it was deepest. But I was hoping I could maybe reach all the way to the other end of the lake on the other side to try to impress my family, because, 13-year-olds can be like that. I remember thinking about how hot the sun was after maybe 5 or 10 minutes. If you've never been to Texas, you need to know that not only is it hot and humid in some places, but man, it gets hot. And while I'm paddleboarding, I'm also trying to keep my balance because I don't want to capsize my little paddleboard, even though life jackets will keep you from drowning. I was a little too sure of myself. I remember paddling as hard and as fast as I could just to see if I could get to the middle of the lake, but I remember thinking about that right before I got to the middle. I don't remember whether I looked to my right or left, and I saw a large, long, dark shape start to get closer to the surface. At the time, I was afraid of fish for some strange reason that I can't remember, so this scared me. So I started paddling twice as fast and trying to go even faster. As it got closer and closer to the surface, this shape got closer and closer to my paddleboard and got closer to the surface. I thought I was a long, skinny fish, probably about 9 feet long, which was much longer and taller than I was, which scared me. Its body was silver with red streaks. Its nose was very long. I had never seen a fish like that before, and I was afraid it would bite me, pull me deep under the water, and kill me. So, in my panic, I turned the paddleboard 180 degrees and started going back to my family. I don't know if I lost my balance on the board while I was turning around or right after I turned around, but I did. I fell right into the water right over where this thing was swimming. I don't know if I could accurately tell you what it's like to be just feet away from a big fish that looks to be about twice your size and has what looked like huge teeth. So I was panicking, and because of how the paddleboard was set up, I had a hard time getting back on it. My family on the shore was yelling at me and starting to worry. I was screaming and freaking out, saying that a big fish was coming to eat me. Even though everything was crazy, I was able to get back on the paddleboard and swim with my hands all the way back to the shore where my family was. What happened to my paddle is a mystery to me. At the time, I wasn't responsible, and I didn't wear it tight around my ankle like most people do. I paddled hard with adrenaline pumping through me, just using my hands to dog paddle while lying on my stomach on the paddleboard. I felt lucky to be alive, and whatever this big fish was, it was swimming right next to me, almost under my board. I could see its shadow, and sometimes it went up close to the surface, and then went back down just a little bit so I couldn't see it. I don't think I've ever been so scared in my life. I was frightened. This thing was going to get me, even though it never touched me or tried to bite me after I fell in the water or in the minute or two it took me to get back on my board. I didn't even think about that or anything else about what was happening. I got back to water that was shallow enough that it came up to my shins or mid-thigh. I jumped off the board and ran to the shore, where I just collapsed on the ground, crying and shaking, and kept pointing to the lake and saying that there was something in it. It was a lot. Well, I was lucky because my dad and uncles were all very skilled fishermen at the time. I told them what had happened, what I had seen, and what the fish looked like. My father just kneels down next to me and says, "Son, what did you see out there?" These fish are known as alligator gar. He then told me that they don't really pose much of a threat, if any. And I think the fish was just curious about the paddleboard and me. That was the day I learned what an alligator gar is, because I had never heard of one before. The whole South seems to be full of dangerous water creatures like water moccasins, alligators, and in my case, alligator gar. Even though they aren't dangerous in and of themselves, they look like they could really ruin your day. Even though my findings are scary, they show that there are large alpha predators in the ocean. Back in March of 1988, this happened. I was on a beach in Maui's southern part. A dead whale had washed up on shore very early in the morning, and it was as clear as day. I'm not sure how often a dead whale washes up on shore. Most of the time, they go to the bottom. I don't know for sure why they ended up on the shore, but I did find it. I don't know much about whales, but it looked like a smaller whale that might have been young. So I couldn't tell you the breed or type, but it was probably a whale that lives in this part of the world. I don't know what killed it though. Well, it must have killed it not too long ago, because about half of the whale was still whole. Just standing there and looking at this thing's dead body. Big pieces of meat were taken from this whale. I know that sharks and other big ocean predators eat whales, but how much, sure? But these pieces were very big. I'm talking about big pieces, some as big as me, that were bitten and torn out of this whale. Whoever or whatever killed this thing either bit it almost in half or just took a few big pieces out of it, leaving what was the top half of the whale. It scared me to think that something that big and that eats meat could live in the water. I immediately thought of a great white shark, but I don't even know if great white sharks live in this part of the ocean, let alone eat whales like this. And I know how long a great white shark can get. I don't know, but look at how big the bites are. I just didn't get the feeling that it was a great white shark. I thought the whole thing was strange and upsetting. Since then, I've been to Hawaii and Maui a lot, and I have seen other dead animals washed up on shore, like dolphins, for one or even small sharks and other various animals, but none the size of a whale with massive chunks of meat bitten and taken right out of it. I guess if he thought about it, if whales come in, and I know they're very frequent around the Maui Hawaiian area, could that potentially draw a large shark or maybe a large alpha predator to feed? I don't know. It definitely makes me not want to go boating out on the ocean just in the fear that I would see something that I wouldn't want to see, like one of these creatures. Before sending you this, I sat down and listened to some of your other sea monster story videos. And while I don't think I had any of those kind of sightings or experiences, this all leads me to believe that there's something larger out there in the waters that we don't know about that is probably eating on these whales. Maybe it's just my creative imagination morbidly and sadistically wanting there to be some sort of mega 60-70 foot long shark eating whales. But then again, I don't know. The ocean holds so many secrets that we don't know about. I guess the possibility of something like this could really be out there even more. So here in the South Pacific, where the deepest part of the ocean is in the entire world. Anyway, I'm not sure if I stumbled onto something extraordinary, or if this was just nature taking its course. Either way, I thought you'd find it interesting, and it certainly makes your imagination run wild. Hi, what lurks beneath? I'm a resident at one of my local villages, and I wanted to talk about all the hard work that the rangers have done in the local countryside. I've met them a few times before, but only several years back, when we mainly had poachers and other unknown hunters in the area. Anyway, I'm writing this to tell you about some things that happened recently. As you know, the area is vast and spread out. I myself live in the town of Burt, and we are pretty rural down there. You can't even see the church piers from where I'm at my backyard. Is pretty much the Alabama countryside, and God's green earth is as dry as a bone this summer. Look, you're gonna think I'm crazy for telling you this. But hey, I'm just a small town girl with a good head on my shoulders. I look after my mum, my dad, and I give my life to the Lord. I ain't a bad girl. I don't even watch television, and you know, I don't want to corrupt my mind. So I was out in the stables, and I have a few ponies. My dad got them for me for my 18th birthday. He always tells me if I spend as much time finding a husband as I do with my horses, then I'd be doing better. But I digress. While I was down by the stables, and my feet were resting on the hay, I decided to have a little rest on the bale. It was a hot day, and I forgot my water now, something I should note. I live about 20 minutes from the stables, which is a long way when you're thirsty on this particular day. The sky was a dewy blue, and I looked up at it and thought, wow, what an awesome place to be. Just as I lay there, I felt something moving from under the bale. It kind of creeped me out. But then, snakes are not that strange here in Alabama, and I jumped up as a precaution. But this was no snake. Something was moving under the bale, and bits of straw were falling around, creating a mess. What was even weirder was that Jeff, my horse, got a little spooked. He was jumping and making all sorts of crazy sounds. I ran over to him as he was my priority from under the bale. Something was stirring. I was shaking and sweating a little with nerves. I looked around to see if there was anybody else nearby, but it was deserted as anything. I decided to be brave and kick the bale. I kicked it with all my might and closed my eyes a little, expecting something to jump out a bit and bite the hell out of me. But no, I opened my eyes and blinked several times in shock. It was big, really big. It was filled with a jelly-like substance. The only thing that looked remotely like was an octopus, but it had a weird humanoid face. It scared the hell out of me. I stepped well back as I thought I'd encountered the devil himself. This thing, this creature, whatever you wanted to call it, was making a disturbing, drowning, gurgling noise. It also had tiny little feet, which appeared to have webbed toes that allowed it to stand no more than 1 eft from the ground. I felt so sick that I was scared. The creature thing slid away just like a jellyfish in the ocean. My eyes never left until it disappeared into the grass. When I got back, I told my dad and mum, and they thought I had been smoking something out there in the barn. Now again, I'm a pretty good girl, and anybody around here can attest to that. I don't know what I saw, but this thing creeped me out. It was not human, and I have never seen an animal like this. It appeared to be very amphibious, some sort of water-like creature. The only thing I can do is look online, but I found that anything like what I looked at is a kind of cryptid, I guess they're called. Anyway, all I know is I sure as hell don't want to see it again. Look, I don't know if this thing crawled out of the nearby pond or some sort of mutated, weird-looking frog, but I don't want to see it again. It scared me. It looks like it belongs in the bottom of a pond, and that's where it needs to stay when I was a kid. My grandma used to keep me and my siblings over at summertime. So during the time it was me, my 2 brothers and my sister, I was the oldest that summer in 1995, I would have been 10 computers were just coming in, and so we played Nintendo a lot just from my memory. Something happened that summer which has haunted me these past 25 years. I'm a grown man now, but still it bugs me that I saw something that summer and I don't know what it was. Grandma would have been in their 50s at the time and was still a pretty fit and agile woman. We lived in a big country house in North Carolina at the time, and we spent most of the summer down by the lakes, jumping into the pools of water and waving at Grandma, who was reading her books and novels on the deck. I remember me and my younger brother Kaylee, who would have been around 8 at the time, or throwing a ball to each other. It was a pretty simple game of throwing back and forth, nothing crazy exciting. Our grandma was taking pictures and looking super proud of us. I can still remember looking at my brother's super thin arms and thinking he ought to be wearing something in the lake if anything happened to us under her watch. My mother would not be very happy. Mom was a businesswoman who spent a lot of her time in New York, and she didn't really favour our grandmother watching us, who was her mother-in-law, but she let it happen regardless. Well, it was a hot summer day like I said, and the lake was filled with children all around the neighbourhood. It wasn't just us. There were teenage kids to playing ball, and I guess being good-for-nothing juvenile delinquents to a smaller kid. I remember all of a sudden the lake seemed to empty as it was just me and Kaylee. I remember looking for my grandma, and she was still there, but resting with her head back. I hope to God there wasn't some shark or something in the lake, and that's why everybody retreated. But I guess that thought was crazy as again. It was just a lake. I was a kid after all, and probably a pretty dumb one too. I continued playing with my brother, and I felt something almost tugging at my foot. It was kind of like a scratching sensation, and it got pretty annoying. I was struggling not to go under after a minute, and only I had the ball to keep me afloat. It seemed like I was going to be dragged underwater. I started screaming and called to my brother for help, but he thought I was just goofing around. I started clapping the water and banging for attention, but no one ever looked. Finally, something dragged me underwater, and I could see under there. Whatever had a hold of me was long and white and was continuously pulling me under. It seemed to have weird, amphibious-like ears and eyes that glowed a dull red under the water. This wasn't a person or any type of fish that I could see. I pulled the release my grip, and I finally did. It was a struggle back to the surface, and I swam back as fast as I could. My brother finally seemed to realize that something was wrong. I told my grandmother, and she told me just not to worry, that it was probably just my imagination. I don't know if anybody has had similar experiences in that lake, but every time I think about it, I get the spooks. I told my wife this story recently, and she's pretty unsure. I counted some sort of being, whatever the heck that is. Could be an alien. I don't know. All I know is that I nearly died, and this thing was no person that was pulling me under the water. It was some sort of strange creature that I'd never seen before. The night. Back at grandmother's, we had hot tea. I was wrapped up in a towel as I was still pretty clammy and sweaty after my incident and shaking in fear. My siblings sat around me as if I was some hero, and I retold the story over and over. Maybe I did add some details to embellish myself as a kid, but now I see it for what it was. You can see the lake from my grandmother's house. It's like a deep white pool of black liquid at night, and sometimes the moon shines over it, and it looks quite breathtaking. I had the craziest idea to go back to the lake at night and see if I could see anything, but my brother luckily talked me out of it that night. I finished my hot tea. I pulled back the curtain and looked down at the lake. I could have swore I saw something popped up and was looking at me, but all I saw was a dark silhouette, a shadow. I continued staring, but what I spotted, or at least what I thought I spotted, seemed to sink back into the deep of the lake. Anyway, the next summer that I went back to her house for the summer, I stayed out of the lake because I remembered everything that happened last year. I sat with my grandmother and read books and just told her I wasn't comfortable swimming. She thought that was odd. What was scary though, and this just disturbed me, it left me with a pit in my stomach. I spotted the face of a kid on a roster near the lake. I walked up to the poster and saw a little kid. He was 7 years old, and the sign read something like Corey Harrison, I think was his name, presumed missing. The date was 6 months previous, and I just looked back to the lake and thought to myself, what if to this day, I don't know if I spotted some sort of creepy creature or maybe just a giant salamander or what, but whatever it was had a firm grip on me and was pulling me down deeper towards the middle. of the lake, and somehow by the grace of God I broke free. Hi, my name is Julie and I have a story that dates all the way back to when I was going to high school with my close friend Leslie. This was nearly 30 years ago. Right now I don't have time for BS. Because the whole quarantine and I kind of have a semi-important job. I work as a lawyer at a law firm in Texas now. So I really don't have time to BS things. So keep in mind that this story did happen. We were both at my friend Leslie's house at the time. I believe we were studying for our SATs. And we were both at my friend Leslie's house in the basement. Actually, if I can remember correctly, we saw something though outside, something large with emerald green eyes, if I remember. And it had weird long ears that drug behind it. Its body was white and it appeared to have several legs. It looked right through the basement window at both of us. And we both screamed and ran away up the stairs up into the kitchen. I remember how terrified we were. We both even cried. But then my friend Leslie began to get really upset at me, thinking that this was a prank that I was pulling on her. I tried to assure her it was no prank. She claimed to have saw through me and was convinced I was lying to her, pranking her. But somehow after some time I convinced her that I wasn't lying and that we both did see something odd. Whatever it wasn't normal and it wasn't a natural animal. This thing was spooky. I'm a little embarrassed even now to admit this, but I have a real interest in the supernatural and things that are normally scary. I thought maybe you'd be interested in to hear my story, although I wish I could tell you what it was we saw. All I can say was it wasn't natural. Was it a ghost? No, it was some sort of living creature. It was flesh and blood, whatever it was. But it had a very scary face. It was definitely something really weird anyway. Not long after my friend moved away, just a few weeks or even a few months after, and we never really got the chance to talk about it. Nor did she ever really want to talk about it afterwards. I think it scared her far more than it scared me. Anyway, I think for me it kind of sparked my resurgence into the paranormal, even as a kid. I always found that stuff interesting but kind of lost interest in it for a while until that happened, which scared the daylights out of me. But then after that, I kind of got back into it, and even now thinking about it, it definitely was something.